Once upon a time, Darth and Joe Vader were up in the mountains looking for minerals that they could use to focus a beam of light because some minerals have extremely fine optics and they can be used to focus a beam of light to create a laser. And Darth and Joe wanted to create a laser for communication purposes because recently they've discovered that the Zaxxons, who are an army of mechanical bugs, have been blocking some of their radio transmissions. So when they try to communicate, when they're on their planet and they try through radio waves to communicate with, say, the Jedi warriors on other planets, the messages don't always get through because the Zaxxons are very good at blocking radio signals. So Darth and Joe decided they would build a large laser beam that could beam messages across the galaxy if it's a powerful enough laser beam that focuses the light just right, and the information, the message, is encoded in the light. You can do this sort of similar thing by taking a flashlight and turning it off and on through a window, and somebody in another house would see the light and see, oh, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. That means I'm hungry for Cuba bean, banana squid sandwich or something. But these messages are much more sophisticated, of course. And so Darth and Joe knew that up on Opal Mountain, Opal Ridge is actually, it's a series of mountaintops on a far corner of their planet. Of course, their planet doesn't really, technically speaking, have corners because it's round, but that's what they tend to say. But up on Opal Ridge, there was a large collection of crystals, natural crystals, and some of them were extremely pure, and they would be good for focusing light. So that's what Darth and Joe were doing that day, collecting crystals, when suddenly Joe said, they were on their hands and knees, kind of digging around, and Joe said, "Quit tickling me." And Darth said, "I'm not tickling you, be quiet, I'm looking for crystals." And Joe said, "Would you please quit? Hey, that's not you." And he looked behind him, and he saw that it wasn't Darth touching his feet and trying to tickle him. It was a fern, a plant, was reaching up underneath his pant leg and was touching him, was actually moving. Now, there are no moving plants on the surface of Darth and Joe's planet that they knew of before, so this was highly unusual. And Darth looked around to see what Joe was looking at, and they looked, and there was this plant. It was only a few inches tall. It didn't even come up to their knees, and it was a beautiful fern, and it was moving, and it looked like it was reaching toward them. And Darth held out his hand, and it touched his hand, and not only did it touch his hand, but it touched his hand with a pattern. Touch, 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 non-touch, touch, 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 non-touch. "It's trying to communicate with us," said Darth. "What's it trying to say?" said Joe. I don't know. We have to write down this information and we'll decode it." So Joe got out his notebook and pencil, and Darth said, "Touch, not touch, 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 not touch, not touch, 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 not touch, touch, not touch." And he wrote down the whole series of touches and not touches in order because there was a rhythm to it. And they said to the plant, "Look, we don't know if you can understand us, because you don't have a verbal language, and we're good at communicating with all animals who speak languages with their voices. And since you just have this touching language, we don't know it. But if you can understand us, we're going to go back and decode this. We'll be right back, okay?" And the plant kind of waved up and down, so they hoped that it understood. So Darth and Joe quickly went back to their house, down to their basement laboratory, to try to figure out what this series of touches and not touches meant. And they wrote it down, and they didn't have any kind of fancy decoder for messages. All they could do is try to look at groupings of messages and compare it to any of the known languages in the galaxy. They had they could use their computer to hook into languages of the galaxies and look for similarities. And after they did this for about 3.5 hours, they came up with a kind of a crude translation, which looked like some sort of extreme emergency. They could tell because the plant was very agitated, and it was saying, "Please give me milkshake," which was very unexpected. Darth and Joe, as far as they knew, didn't think that plants of any kind, anywhere in the galaxy, ate milkshakes. Why does this plant want a milkshake? We don't know. How does he even know what a milkshake is? We don't know. So Darth and Joe quickly went upstairs and whipped up a milkshake in the kitchen. They didn't know whether it wanted chocolate or vanilla, so they made one vanilla milkshake and one chocolate milkshake. And they went back to the Opal Mountain Ridge.
How about strawberry milkshake?
You know, they didn't think of that, but right when they were right out the door, Joe said, "How about strawberry milkshakes?" And so they ran and they made up some strawberry milkshakes too. And they had 3 milkshakes, and they were just going out the door when they decided to make mango milkshake. Now, as you know, there's no mango on Darth and Joe's planet until now, but Darth and Joe remembered that on planet Earth there were mangoes, so they quickly transported to planet Earth, and they knocked on Mr. E's door, and he was busy juggling mangoes at the time, and Joe said, "We'll take that," and they reached out and they grabbed from the air 2 mangoes that were flying, so he was left just juggling 1 mango up and down, and they said, "Thanks, bye, see ya," and they left, and they transported back to their planet. And so then they made mango milkshake, so they had mango, strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla milkshake, and they transported back up to Opal Ridge, being careful not to spill. They couldn't help themselves. They drank a little of each milkshake because they tasted so good, but that was it. They left plenty for the plant, and they got back to Opal Ridge, and it was kind of difficult for them to find the plant at first because it was only a little plant, and it was in the woods. It was covered with plants. And they were walking, and Darth said, "Not now, Joe. I'm looking for the plant." "Not Joe. Stop it. Not now. I'm looking for. I'm not doing anything." Oh, it was the plant. It was touching Darth on the neck. "Oh, it's you. Hi." And the plant kind of waved up and down, and Darth and Joe said, "Look, we've brought you milkshakes. We have vanilla," he put it down, "chocolate, strawberry, and mango milkshakes. Is this what you want? Is this what you've been trying to tell us?" And the plant kind of reached over and looked inside each cup. Well, he didn't really have eyes, so maybe he sniffed. I don't know how he detected it, perhaps through some sort of chemical reaction. But he touched each one of the milkshakes to look inside of it, and then the plant started moving again. And so Darth said, "Get out your pencil and notebook. We'll see what it wants to say." And Darth held out his hand, and the plant touched him. Touch, 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 not touch, touch, not touch, not touch, touch, don't touch. But I left that not touch after the first touch. Okay, touch, not touch, 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 touch. And they wrote down the whole series, and they said, "We'll be right back. We'll leave the milkshakes with you, and then we'll be right back." And the plant kind of waved. So Darth and Joe quickly went back to their house. They went back to their basement. They translated it. This was faster because they had translated it once before, so they thought they had a pretty good idea of the language. And they looked back and at the message, and it said, "Not milkshakes, you idiots. Take milk from shakes." Huh? Take milk from shakes? What does that mean? "Maybe we're not translating it right," said Joe. That plant called us an idiot," said Darth. "True. Well, he's probably in a bad mood. I tell you what, let's go up and try to straighten this whole thing out." So they went back to the plant, and Darth by now had learned the plant language pretty well, so he touched the plant in a series of touch, not touches, and he touched the plant in order to say, "What do you mean, take milk from shakes?" And the plant pointed to the ground, and then touched Darth and said, "Shakes, shakes." And Darth said, "Huh? The ground is shakes?" No, said the plant, touching Darth frantically. And he pointed down. "Maybe he means under the ground," said Joe. "Good thinking," said Darth. And so they decided to stand back from the plant, and they started digging. They just used their lightsabers to dig because they hadn't brought any real shovels with them. They had small shovels that they used for emergencies, so that helped them too. But they didn't have any large ones with them at the time. And they dug until they got to a sort of a steel surface that they didn't expect because they were up in a mountain ridge in the woods. But there was metal. "Hey, there's metal here. What should we do? Should we puncture it?" "I don't know," said Darth. "It could be dangerous." And he kind of tapped on it, and it sounded hollow. "Let's go for it," said Joe. "Okay," said Darth. And they cut a hole, like a doorway, in this metal that they had dug up. This was about 2.5 or 3 feet down in the ground. And they pulled the metal apart, and it was dark in there. They used your lightsabers for light, and they went down into the hole. Well, it was some sort of hollow room. Well, most rooms are hollow unless they're filled completely with something. And it was metallic, and it was reminding them of the inside of a spaceship. And they looked around, and they had their lightsabers on. They took out some flashlights because they had some really super terrific flashlights that were very bright. And they looked around to try to see where they were and what was going on. And the walls were very smooth and clean and made out of metal, and there's a little light coming out from underneath a door at the opposite end of the room. So Darth and Joe walked over there, and they looked. They listened, and they said, "We'll never know what's going on unless we open that door." And so they did. Was the sound that the door made when they opened it. And then they heard a voice saying, "I should really oil that door. Hey, who are you?" "No, not who. This is Joe and I'm Darth." And Joe said, "Yeah, he's Darth and I'm Joe." "Oh." And they said, "What's your name?" "My name's Shakes the Clown." "What's going on?" "Well, we came down here because of an emergency involving a plant that lives up on the ground." "Oh, yes, I've heard about the plants. They live up on the ground. Yes, yes, yes. Well, how can I help you, boys?" And they said, "Well, Shakes, do you have some milk?" "Oh, sure, I've got lots of milk. In fact, I found a whole sea of underground, like a river of milk. I'm planning to sell it. I'm going to make a lot of money because this milk is really delicious. Look." And Shakes showed him that he turned on a faucet and this milk came out, and they said, "What? This milk is just coming from underground?" "Yeah, there's a whole river. I've tapped into it. I've hit the mother lode. I'm gonna have milk up to my ears. There's gonna be so much milk. In fact, I haven't been able to bottle it quickly enough. I suck it up into this room over here." And he showed them there was a glass window, and he pointed down to a huge room that was filled with milk. "And I have to just let most of it go into the ground because I can only bottle so much of it for the milk market on your planet. You know, I haven't been to very many planets before, but this is a planet that consumes an awful lot of milk. You guys love milk, especially this underground milk." And they were thinking, underground milk? We should analyze that. And they said, "Can we have some of that milk?" And they said, yeah, take some. It's free sample." And they took some of the milk from Shakes the Clown, and they transported back to their laboratory in their basement. And they discovered, first of all, that from the DNA strands in this milk, that this was dinosaur milk, which was kind of unusual to begin with. But why is dinosaur milk flowing in huge quantities underground? Well, that was a question that Darth and Joe did not know the answer to right away. But they decided, first of all, they better help the plant. They transported back to Opal Ridge. They went down into the hole, into the spaceship, and they asked Shakes the Clown, what's the deal with what's the deal with this spaceship anyway? And Shakes said, "Oh, I crash landed here about 300 years ago." "Wow, you're pretty old," they said. "Oh, well, my people live for a long time. Anyway, I was desperate for a long time. I was sucking minerals out of the ground with some machines because we had completely run out of food. Then we ran into this great source of milk and we started eating it, and that's when I started bringing tons of it up and realized that I could use it to bottle it and sell it. I'm going to make $1 million, I tell you, $1 million. And Darth and Joe said, "Well, that's just a great plan, Shakes, except there's when you let the extra milk into the ground, it seems to be bothering the plants. And this is dinosaur milk, first of all. And second of all, according to my studies," said Joe, "this milk might be toxic or poisonous to the plants that live above." And Shakes said, "What? Well, who cares about the plants that live above?" "Well, the plants care." "What?" "Yes, there are some thinking, sentient plants up there that can move and communicate," said Joe. And Darth said part of the sentence, Joe said the other part. "Are you serious? What are you talking about? Show me." And so they took Shakes the Clown up onto the ground, and they up to the fern, and they said, "Look," and Darth held out his hand, and the plant touched Darth's hand, and the plant said, "I sense there is another with you." And Darth tapped back to the plant and said, "Yes, we brought Shakes the Clown up to talk to you." "Shakes, the milkman." No, Shakes the plant, the clown," said Darth. "Yes, but Shakes the one who is releasing the milk into the ground. All of the plants here know about him. He is evil. He must be destroyed." No, said Darth. "He doesn't mean to harm you." And Darth explained to Shakes, "These plants are very, very angry with you because you're poisoning them." "Oh." And the plant said, "Look, this field used to be filled with plants just like me, but they've been strangled by the toxic milk stuff in the soil. It's squeezing out all the water, and we can't absorb the minerals." And so Darth explained that to Shakes the Clown, and Shakes said, "Well, I don't know what to do." And Darth said, "Well, maybe we can divert this stream of milk of yours, so that, because right now too much of it's coming up here, you're not able to bottle it in time. What if we built some tubing, some large pipes down the mountain, and had it flow back down the mountain, and you could put into maybe a holding cell down there, and then bottle it from there. And Jake said, yeah, that's great, but that's going to be expensive. Well, you'll pay for it with the milk that you sell, said Joe. Huh, excellent idea. And so, but Darth and Joe said, but you know something? I'm not sure that the people of our planet want to drink dinosaur milk. In fact, I'm very confused as to why there's a huge quantity of dinosaur milk to begin with. But Darth and I are going to do some exploring. And Darth said, yes, we're going to find out what the source of this milk is. And Shake said, yes, the better we know about this, the better. It's always good to have as much information as possible. I call it information gathering. That way we can find out exactly where this is coming from and maybe get even more of it. Then I can make millions of dollars. That's right, millions of dollars, said Shake the Clown. And so Darth and Joe knew that they... That's right, because he shakes the clown and he wants to get millions of dollars. That's right, millions of dollars. And so Darth and Joe decided that they would have to swim upstream through the underground stream of milk to find out what its source was. Either that or they would have to dig underground, but if they could stay in the milk, they would make sure to get to the source. And so they did that. They got some scuba diving gear on, and they went for it, and they put a light on the front of their heads, and they swam and swam and swam underwater with special oxygen. They don't wear oxygen tanks on their back. They have these little things that they put in their mouths that have enough oxygen for them to survive on, as you know about. And they swam until they got to a huge pool of underground of milk. And they looked, and it was a giant room. And on one end was a dinosaur. That's all I could say to describe it, except it was larger than any Allosaurus or Tyrannosaurus or anything from human history. This dinosaur was enormous, so much so that this milk was probably just a few drops to it. And sure enough, the dinosaur was releasing milk into this pool, which was flowing downstream. And so Darth and Joe looked at each other, and they figured that they'd better find out where this milk is supposed to be flowing to. And they went back the other way, downstream, down the stream, past where Shakes the Clown was diverting a lot of the milk. And they could see where the original milk tunnel was, even though there was only a trickle of milk going to the original location. Because remember, Shakes the Clown dug underground, and he had diverted the milk stream to his spaceship in Opal Mountain Ridge. But the original, where was the milk going to before he had done that? And they followed it underground, and it went to another underground chamber, which was not connected at all to the pit of death. First of all, it was news to Darth and Joe that there were underground dinosaurs on their planet. But here was a really sad thing. They came to a huge room full of baby dinosaurs, and there was some sort of empty pond type thing with only a tiny bit of milk, and the dinosaurs were trying to lap it up, but there was hardly enough milk to go around, and they were crying. These were some sad dinosaurs. And Darth and Joe decided, yes.
Why doesn't Joe write this down and put it in the pit of death?
That's exactly, well, first of all, he was too busy to even think about that, but when they went back to Shakes the Clown, Joe quickly got his notebook out and started taking notes about all these dinosaurs and milk and so forth, just in case there was a way they could use in the pit of death, like the swirling, obnoxious, noxious gas monster that they discovered in an earlier adventure that wasn't recorded by human technology. And so the stream of milk, and the Darth and Joe, and they got back to Shakes the Clown, and they said, we have to take you somewhere else, Shakes. And they took Shakes to the place of where the dinosaur babies were, and he could see that they were extremely sad and they weren't getting enough milk. And he said, oh no, well, I have to divert the excess milk that I've been getting, they haven't been able to bottle, back down to them so they can at least get that. So quickly they transported back to his spaceship, and he started getting some more milk to flow that way. And Darth and Joe said, have you ever actually tried to sell this milk on our planet? And he said, no, milk's milk. People love milk. Your planet eats a lot of milk. I'm going to make $1 million, $1 million, I tell you. And so he, of course, was very excited about the fact that he was going to make $1 million. And so but Darth and Joe said, let's just find out, because he had been bottling the milk, but he hadn't tried to sell it. So they brought a few crates of the milk down to their planet, and they tried they tried selling it to people. People tried drinking it. They took it to the milk store. They even tried making milkshakes out of it. The problem with dinosaur milk was that it tasted terrible. It's lizard milk. It's the most disgusting thing you can imagine. It doesn't taste anything like milk from a cow or from a brontosaurus, although that is also dinosaur milk, technically speaking. But these weren't brontosauruses. And so nobody wanted Shakes the Clown milk, and he was very depressed, and he said, I'm not going to make $1 million. I'm not going to make $1 million. And Darth and Joe said, well, maybe there's some sort of solution. Let's see what's going on. First of all, let's see if we can. You've only diverted some of the milk back to the baby dinosaurs. Perhaps we need to fix that problem to begin with, so that they can have all the milk they need. And they transported back to Opal Mountain with Shakes, and they transported downstream to the baby dinosaurs to check it out. And they were so happy. They were splashing in the milk. They were drinking it. And Darth and Joe, being googs, could communicate with the dinosaurs and ask them if they missed that there used to be more milk coming. And the dinosaurs said, no, there used to be too much milk that came. In fact, some of our friends would get washed away downstream, and we'd have to go looking for them. There was so much milk. Now there's just the right amount. And that gave Darth and Joe an idea. They went back with Shakes to his spaceship, and they said, look, you're diverting. You're getting a lot of the original milk down to the baby dinosaurs, but you've diverted some of it for your milk bottling operation. Well, our people on our planet don't want this milk, but maybe somewhere else in the galaxy they do. And Shakes the Clown said, yes, Dinosaur Planet, or Planet of the Dinosaurs. There's several planets with dinosaurs on them. And so he bottled a whole bunch of the milk, and he kept his bottling operation. He set up his factory so it would continue bottling the milk, but instead of small bottles, he started making large bottles. And he took his spaceship, which he was going to blast right up, and Darth and Joe reminded him, you can't blast up with your original spaceship, Shakes, because you'll destroy all the plants that live above you. But why don't you come with us, and we'll give you a loaner spaceship. And they did. They loaned him their spaceship, and he took some of the milk to dinosaur planets, and they were so happy to have it that they paid him, and they paid him with the most exquisite diamonds you have ever seen, because Dinosaur Planet is filled with, has whole entire islands made out of this perfect crystalline, this perfect crystal lattice diamonds. And so Shakes the Clown was excited because he could sell these diamonds that he was getting for the dinosaur milk. He made more than $1 million. He made more than $1 million. And in the meantime, he showed Darth and Joe these great diamonds, and they said, hey, that is beautiful. These diamonds are perfect. Do you think we could? And he said, hey, I want you to have some. You've helped me out more than I could ever hope for. I want you to have some of these diamonds. Here, take them. And they said, yes, we're going to build a great laser for communication with these diamonds. Thanks, Shakes. And they took it back, and they built their communication laser, which was able to communicate right past the Zaxxons, who could no longer stop them because they had laser communication to the Jedis or to anybody else they needed to communicate with in the galaxy. And that's the way they solved that problem. The end. Once upon a time, Billy the goat, who was not a very smart goat, was out looking for clover to eat. Now
In fact, he was a very dumb goat.
Yes, I guess you could say that, because he got confused very easily. Well, Jar Jar also gets confused, but in this case, Jar Jar was running in the same neighborhood that Billy the goat lived, because he was running after some apples that had fallen out of an apple tree and fallen downhill and were rolling, and Jar Jar was saying, apples, apples, my apples. And Billy the goat saw this Jar Jar creature, this Gungan, running after him, calling him an apple, and Billy thought, I am an apple, apple goat am I. And he stood very still and waited for Jar Jar to get him, and Jar Jar tripped over Billy the goat and said, why didn't you get out of the way? And Billy the goat said, because I am an apple, I cannot move. And Jar Jar thought that was very strange, but he thought, if I understood this goat correctly, he thinks he's an apple goat, that could be useful. I collect apples. And so Jar Jar picked up Billy the goat under his arm and carried him back to his house. Well, Billy the goat didn't really know what apples do, so he just waited around for Jar Jar to tell him what to do. And Jar Jar said, you are an incredible apple goat, because you can walk. And Billy the goat looked down at his legs and noticed that he had 4 legs. Wow! Billy the goat said, I am a walking apple. That's amazing. And he started walking around. And the more he walked, the more he thought, I am the most amazing apple in the world. And so Jar Jar was excited too to have this big walking apple around as a friend. He decided to show him to his friends Darth and Joe Vader. And so he said, come on, apple goat, come on, apple goat. And he said, Darth and Joe, look what I have. And they looked, wow, a goat. No, 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 Darth, Joe, apple goat. This goat an apple. Apple. See? And they said, are you going to eat this goat? No, no. This goat, one of a kind. This apple, a apple goat. Apple goat, big good goat for apple. Jar Jar apple goat. Jar Jar become famous apple goat Jar Gungan. And then he took the apple goat back with him. And Darth and Joe looked at each other kind of confused and didn't really know what to say. And so meanwhile, the farmer's daughter noticed that Billy the goat was missing. Oh, where is he now? She said, Billy, Billy the goat. And as she was walking around, she noticed that there were apples on the field. These are the apples that Jar Jar had forgotten about when he saw the big apple goat. And so she was picking up the apples and looking for Billy. She knew that Billy the goat liked to eat apples. Billy, I've got some apples. And she started walking and walking. She was following this little trail of apples. It led right to Jar Jar's house. Billy, I have apples. And the Gungan lifted up his ears and heard the word apple, and he swung the door open, and she saw Billy the goat inside. Billy, Billy, Billy! And she started running with the apples, and she tripped, and she dropped all the apples on his floor, and they ran toward Billy the goat. And Jar Jar thought, wow, human people bring apples to apple goat. This great apple goat. And so he put the apple goat on the roof of his house so that people could see him from far away and bring apples to him. And he waited around for them to bring apples. And he waited and waited, and meanwhile the farmer's daughter said, come on, Billy, come on, Billy. And Billy said, no, Billy, apple goat, Billy. And she was very confused, and she said to Jar Jar, why do you have my goat on your roof? And Jar Jar said, this big apple goat gonna bring big apples to Jar Jar. And she said, but that was my... Yeah. And she said, but that's my apple goat. That's my apple goat from my apple goat farm. And because she figured that she remembers that she used to have this apple goat living in her goat pen. And Jar Jar said, that your apple goat? Jar Jar paid for apple goat with apples, and he picked up all the apples that she had brought him, and he handed them to her and said, now Jar Jar own apple goat. And she said, well, okay. And she walked back kind of toward her farm, and she was kind of lonely because she was used to having that apple goat in her backyard. And Jar Jar sat at home waiting for the people to bring the apples. And he waited and waited, and he was very proud. Oh, gonna have lots of apples tonight, thought Jar Jar. Lots of them. Lots of apples. It got later and later, and Jar Jar wondered where the people were with the apples. So he stood out in front of his house and started singing this little song he made up. Apple goat on roof, bring me the apples, bring Jar Jar apples. Apple goat on roof, not a hoof, yes, four hoofs on the apple goat on the roof. Bring the apples and some more for Jar Jar's apple goat. And he pointed up, and people still didn't come. There were a few curious onlookers when he was standing outside singing about his apple goat, but nobody really understood why he had a goat on his roof. And he waited and waited and thought, something wrong with apple goat. And he looked up and said, apple goat, people not bring apples to apple goat anymore. And the apple goat didn't know what was going on either, so Billy said, no. And so Jar Jar got him off the roof, and they started pacing around the room. And Jar Jar was walking around the room in circles, and the apple goat was walking after him. They kept walking in circles and thinking about it. And then Jar Jar had an idea. Maybe the apple goat was too old. Maybe it was time to plant the apple goat and grow a new tree of apple goats. And he told the apple goat this, and the apple goat, Billy thought, oh, good idea. And so Jar Jar, the very next day, because it was late that night, took Billy the apple goat out into the field. He took him right near where he had his whole orchard of apples, but there was a big space. He figured probably an apple goat tree would be pretty big, so he'd need a lot of space. And he dug a big hole, and he put Billy the goat into it just so his head was sticking up so that he could give him water to drink. And he waited around, and he said he sat by him because he was a very attentive gardener, and he sat by him for a long time, and Billy's head was sticking out of the ground. He could look around, but he couldn't really move. And then he was pouring water into his mouth, whenever Billy seemed thirsty. And meanwhile, the farmer's daughter was out walking around, wishing that she had still had her friend, the goat Apple, who used to live in her backyard. And she decided that maybe she would buy Billy the goat back from Jar Jar by getting Billy the apple goat, by giving him some more apples. So she started collecting apples from the apple orchard, and that's when she saw it, the head of Billy the goat sticking out of the ground. And she walked up, and at first she thought maybe it was just the head. And she said, "Are you the head of my apple goat?" And Billy said, "Yes, yes." And she said, "Oh, wow, you're growing in the ground." "Yes." "You look like you're ripe." "Yes." "I should pick you now. You're probably ready to be harvested." And so she got a shovel out, and she started digging Billy the goat out of the ground, and she picked him, and she said, "Wow, you've turned into a big goat." And Billy the goat was very surprised because he thought he was an apple, or at least have apple roots or something. But as far as she could tell, he looked like a goat. And she thought, "Oh, this isn't right. I think that you should look more like an apple by now, because you look still a lot like a goat." And she was very worried. And she said, "I'm going to take this apple goat to the veterinarian and see what's wrong." And she put him in the car, and they drove to veterinarian, and she said, "Excuse me, veterinarian, I have an apple goat here." "Excuse me?" "Yes, I have my apple goat, and it doesn't look like an apple at all. It looks more like a goat. I think something's wrong." And he said, "Is this the same goat who looked like a little boy, and the goat that was really a dog who was really a goat, and the goat who was a cat but it was really a goat that you brought in before?" And she thought about it, and she said, "Yes, this goat turns into lots of things." And so the veterinarian said, "All right, bring him in." And he said, "What you have here, yes, is an ordinary goat." "Well, is that wrong for an apple to turn into a goat like that?" And he said, "No, I don't know. I don't know if this used to be an apple, but it looks like a goat to me. Here, in fact, I have an apple in my pocket. Look, how about an apple?" And Billy ate it. "Oh, you're my goat." And so she took Billy the goat back home, and he was very happy to be back in his goat pen. Unfortunately, Jar Jar was out walking in the orchard to give Billy the goat more food, and he saw that his apple goat tree had obviously grown up into a huge tree, and somebody had taken it, or perhaps even worse, the tree had pulled up its roots and walked away. And Jar Jar was thinking, "Oh, where is Apple Goat Tree? Apple Goat Tree has left me. Jar Jar not have Apple Goat Tree." And he looked around, and he thought, well, maybe he could follow the trail of apple goats dropped from the apple goat tree. And when he saw, until he found the tree itself. And so he started walking around, and he walked down toward the first place he had seen that one wonderful apple tree in the farmer's daughter's field. And he saw in the goat pen, he heard a sound, "Meh," and it reminded him of the sound that apple used to say. And he followed that sound, and sure enough, there was an apple goat right in the goat pen. And he said, "Did you fall from the apple tree?" And Billy the goat thought, "I must have fallen from an apple tree." "Yes, you must be a goat apple. I have to find your tree." "Yes, fine tree," said Billy. And so they started looking around for the apple tree, and they didn't know where to look. And the farmer's daughter was busy milking the cows at the time, and so they walked up to her, and the Gungan said, "Excuse me, human type person, we're looking for the tree, this goat apple I have here." And she said, "Yes. It came from a tree, see, and this goat apple came from a goat apple tree, and that tree is gone." So, and she said, "This goat apple came from me. This is my goat apple." "You the goat apple tree?" He said, I am, she said. Yes, you goat apple tree. You look like human. Goat apple trees look like humans, said Jar Jar. And so he shook her hand because he was very proud to meet her. Where are other goat apples? And she said, this is my only goat apple. And he said, well, goat apple belonged to goat apple tree. But if people bring apples to goat apple tree, then you share with Jar Jar? And she said, of course I will, Jar Jar, because goat apple trees are very honest and true. And so she was very proud of herself for being a goat apple tree and yet living in a nice farmhouse. And so Jar Jar left, and later that day, when he was over at Georgie Appleboy's apple shop and accidentally knocking over a stack of apples, which he does pretty much every day, he was talking to Georgie Appleboy about his whole experience with the apple goat and the apple tree and the goat apple tree that talked and the apple goat tree. And Georgie Appleboy was not understanding him at all. And he talked about how he put the goat apple on his roof, and then he planted the goat apple, and then the tree walked away, and the tree turned out to be a very nice person. And then he heard some footsteps coming up the hill. The apples that he had knocked down from Georgie Appleboy's stand, which he doesn't like being called Georgie Appleboy, by the way, his name is George, they had rolled down into the farmer's daughter's field. And so she had brought them with her goat apple, because she didn't want to leave the goat apple very far away from her in case, he'd get lost or somebody might try eating him. And so she had a handful of apples, and she said, I have these apples that just keep rolling up to my goat apple. And she gave them to Jar Jar. Oh, it worked! Yes, Jar Jar paid for apples with apples, he said, and he gave them to Georgie Appleboy, and he said, but what about the apples you knocked down? Here are more apples. Hey, those look familiar. And he grabbed more apples and he thanked her. And every day when Jar Jar visited the Georgie Appleboy's apple stand and accidentally knocked down a stack of apples, they rolled down the hill to the farmer's daughter's field, and she brought them back up to Jar Jar to share with him for letting her use the goat apple as her friend, and because she is a very nice goat apple tree. The end. Once upon a time, Darth and Joe had just come from their own pit of death, where Joe had been working on building some dinosaurs who created milk and some gas monsters and various other things that they had seen in the real pit of death, or other places underground. And Darth and Joe decided to go back to the real pit of death for some more monster scouting, they called it, where they would scope out and scout out and see what kind of monsters they could find in the pit of death, because it seemed like there was always something new. And this time they flipped down into the pit of death, being careful not to get crushed by the metal spikes, feeding salt to the salt vampires, and also not touching the line of biting, stinging ants, which were not always there, but sometimes were there on the wall, that they had to use their Jedi powers to bounce to the opposite wall and then back again when they were crawling down the walls. And so they crawled down the walls, not getting bitten or stung by the biting, stinging ants, and they were down in the corridor. And they were walking down the corridor, noticing a few hobgoblins running past them in fear, and they kept walking, and they noticed a few gawks running past them in fear, and that got them to thinking. And Joe said, gawks usually aren't running away in fear. You're right, said Darth. You don't suppose that gas creature was reformed. See, the thing is that in a very, very dangerous and creepy earlier adventure, the swirling noxious fumes in the very bowels of the pit of death had been animated when some leaves accidentally caught on fire that when a hobgoblin knocked over a torch, and the electric the gases, when they were caught on fire and burned, caused this horrible creature to be created, which then was trying to swallow up all the monsters of the pit of death. The monsters actually had to cooperate and work together with Darth and Joe in order to mix it with fog. This was the previous adventure. Yes?
Why aren't you telling those Angela stories?
Well, I'm just telling the background to this story. In order to understand the story I'm about to tell you about, I have to tell you about why they think that these monsters might be so afraid. See, they're afraid that maybe this gas creature has reformed. They don't know if it has or not, and they don't know where Rodanzilla is. They've got their own Rodanzilla in their pit of death, but they decided to check out, because if Rodanzilla was afraid, then they knew for sure that this gas creature must have come back to life. But they told the thing is that they told those monsters to be very careful not to get any fire near this gas creature, because the last time that happened, it turned into a horrible monster, and they had to go all around trying to find it, and they'd scare it. It even seeped up through the dirt and escaped the pit of death and was on the outside world for a while, as you recall. And so fog was able to stop it, especially when they put electricity into it. But some of the gases escaped and just turned into regular gas that swirled around the bottom of the pit of death and the belly of the pit of death. But that was safe as long as they didn't have fire. So they decided to go down to visit Rodanzilla. They just follow the sounds.
So you said afraid of anything. It's like always out in the open.
Yes, well, Rodanzilla, you're right, was not afraid. And they said, why? They asked Rodanzilla, why are all the other monsters running away? And Rodanzilla said, it is the gas creature. It is back. They said, how? I thought that you monsters were going to keep the fire away. And Rodanzilla said, was not us monsters. And who was it then? Someone the monsters do not know. Rodanzilla was speaking in his own language, but that's what he said. Someone the monsters do not know. Someone has and they thought, could this be some sort of super newly improved Oculus or something? Who would be devious? Who nobody could even control a creature like that. They thought, who would be stupid enough to animate a creature like that? And suddenly they turn around and they bumped into someone who said, do it, what time? 5 o'clock. And they, what are you doing here, Doby Do? And it was Doby Do from their pit of death. What are you doing here? Doby Do, look for Darth and Joe, but very dark in this part of pit of death. That's because you're in the real pit of death. So Doby Do used torch. You mean fire? Yes, and Doby Do trip and fall, and fire smell very bad in gas room. Oh no, you've started the gas creature, said Joe. Doby Do? Yes, the Doby Do gas creature. Now, we've got to get you back to our pit of death, and it might not even be safe there. But how did you get over here? Doby Do fall through Kraken wall. And they checked out, and sure enough, there was a crack in their wall, which led to the pit of death, so the real pit of death. So they were able to patch that up, but they had no idea where the gas creature was. And that's when the Guacs, which some of them had come in through the crack into their pit of death, running away from the monster, said they saw it. They saw the gas creature going down one of the wormhole tubes to another planet's pit of death. So Darth and Joe Vader went back to the pit of death, but there were a lot of wormholes to choose from. Which one did it go down? And they just randomly chose one, and it led into the pit of death of planet Vulcan, which actually, Vulcans are from Vulcan. And Darth and Joe went down there, and when they got there, the monsters of that pit of death had no idea about the gas creature. They could tell right away, because as soon as they saw Darth and Joe, they decided to eat them. And so they knew that they weren't scared of any gas creature. They didn't only had eating humans or Vulcans on their mind. And they were attacked by a blanket. In the distance, they could hear babies crying. That's how scary this pit of death was. And the blanket creature was a purple. There were two of them. They were purple and red. And what they do is they swoop down from the ceiling and they cover you up. And so Joe was busy scribbling down stuff on his notebook about flying blankets, and Darth was saying, not now, Joe, write it down later. And they looked out, because the things try to fall on you, and they create an airtight seal, and then they digest you. And so Darth and Joe were busy using their Jedi flipping abilities to flip out of the way of the blankets, and they realized right away they were in the wrong pit of death. As they dived back into the tube, got sucked back to their, to, could have been to another pit of death, but luckily they went back exactly the way they came, back to their pit of death. And then they were about to try another one, when Darth said, wait a minute, there must be a better way. There's so many pits of death, tubes. And Joe said, the smell. Let's follow the smell. And they could smell that there was the noxious, horrible gas creature had been there, but they weren't sure which way. And so...
Because the wormholes would carry away the smelly.
Yeah, but there'd be a smell leading up to the individual wormhole. A trail, a chemical trail. For instance, if they had a really good dog...
It might have gone all around and like tried to digest the hole and then gone through.
That's true. It could have tried to digest the hole, in which case it would leave smell all around the edge of the hole.
And all around other holes.
Right, so there was no way that using smell would detect it. So they decided that the best thing to do was to get teams of monsters to go through the different pits of death and to report back how the monsters were, to ask the monsters on the other side if they were friendly enough, or to report back if the monsters attacked them right away, just come straight back. And if the monsters didn't attack them but were scared and were talking about gas creatures, then they knew that they had hit the right one. So they formed little teams of goblins and guacs. Every team had a guac to protect them because monsters on all worlds were afraid of the little guacs. And so And so Darth and Joe went into another tube. A team of hobgoblins and a guac went into a different tube, and so forth.
Did they go with the guac, Darth and Joe? Did they?
No, Darth and Joe figured they could protect themselves because they were Jedi warriors.
So I think they should bring them